Time on a spaceship moved fast. At least it seemed that way, as the days flowed into each other without clearly defined borders. As their journey had been put on hold for the moment, days and weeks passed, and what should have been the day they would arrive at their destination came and went without anything changing about their status. Behind the scenes, proceedings must have been running a mile a minute, with investigations and preparations all happening at the same time, to get some clarity on the situation at hand. However, even though she had been very involved up to a point, as a non-military person with basically no clearance, Nier was now left in the dark about most things, only getting brief pointers, at most, whenever something new was discovered. And since she couldn't bear remaining idle, not only for worry about James, but also because it would surely drive her crazy to just do nothing for a long amount of time, Nier had decided that she would use her unwilling vacation to make the stay on, and getting used to the human ship and customs for our off-world friends as welcoming as possible. With a smile on her face, she busied herself by washing off vegetables in the kitchen, while behind her, one of the ship's cooks worked on getting a meal ready for everybody that couldn't eat the ship's usual diet. You know, before all of this, I would have thought that cooking for off-worlders would be a fun challenge, the man suddenly commented, out of the blue, and Nier turned her head to look at him in surprise. But this is so dull. He straightened himself up, putting down the cut of meat he was working on for a moment to free his hands so he could gesture with his knife. Cuts of meat, plain, not too well done. No size, no spices, no condiments, nothing. Just cuts of meat, he loudly lamented, while seemingly trying to slice up the air in his frustration, making Nier inadvertently take a step away from him, even though she already stood outside of his range of motion. And on the other side, there's greens. Greens. I can't stand it anymore. How can an entire species be so tasteless? Nier slightly shook her head while looking at the man bemusedly. It's not their fault half of our cuisine is based on basically poisoning ourselves, she commented, trying to calm him down a bit. And it's not like spices have any real nutritional value, so we shouldn't be surprised that the predator isn't seeking out some plant's natural deterrent to slap her in their kills. Wouldn't kill them to try out something new for once in their lives, the cook grumbled on, and Nier decided it would probably be best to just let him get his frustration out. It may have been against protocol that a civilian would be the one serving the prisoners their food, however since Nier had volunteered to do it, the captives were considered low risk, and it was quite dull work in the end. Nobody was going to complain. With a small cart carrying their varying dishes, some of which were actually just large cooking pots filled with greens and meat, since there were some big mouths to fill after all, she finally made her way through the upper deck of the ship, and towards the elevator leading down. The strong shifting of gravity the closer you moved to the ship's core enhanced the feeling of going down an elevator tenfold, and it always made Nier slightly woozy as it happened. However, leaning against the elevator wall, she quickly recovered, but when the doors opened for her, she confidently pushed the cart out into the halls of the lower decks. The soldiers positioned to guard the elevator greeted her politely as she waved back at them, while steadying on to her destination. The door cell closest to the elevator was occupied by Moore, which was a good thing too, because her food was by far the heaviest, even though that was all relative in this low gravity. It still made the cart easier to move. Nier announced her arrival by loudly knocking on the door. "Do come in," the loud, high voice of the old lady immediately called out, and Nier opened the door with the push of a button. It was a well-known fact that soldiers, at their core, were a simple people and easy to maintain. They didn't need much to thrive, even in as simple an environment as a spaceship. However, while they would usually provide themselves with their own enrichment if left to their own devices, any source of variety and diversification was extremely welcome to them, and most would gladly jump on any opportunity for something new or out of the ordinary. The arrival of the Offworlders, even though they were technically prisoners here, had very much exemplified this, as visiting the lower decks to get a look at and a conversation or other interaction with the curious beings on board had basically become a sort of pilgrimage on board the Salem. This had brought some interesting changes with it, all tailored specifically to the Offworlder in question. Moore was not only by far the most approachable out of the prisoners, but as what was basically a gigantic plush monster, she also had a certain level of appeal to her that spoke to many of the more soft-sided occupants of the Salem, as well as to those who loved working with hair. The old lady had proven herself to be quite agreeable to all kinds of activities, or being around the excitable Deathworlders, and therefore her days had been filled with all kinds of excitements and experiences that the crew could come up with. Specifically, this meant makeovers. A lot of makeovers, with basically a new one every week. This week, flowers and braids were all the rage, and the visitors had not been lazy. Her previously almost unkempt-looking wild coat of fur had been trimmed and excessively brushed, giving it a smooth, silky look. The wild strands of hair had been tamed by hair products and braiding techniques from all over the world, and combined with white, yellow and orange flowers that harmonised with her natural, earthy fur colour and gave her a nice summer look, although Earth was technically nearing fall already, but that didn't matter out here in space. The appearance was rounded out by a knitted dark green robe that the old lady loosely wore over her shoulder and fastened around her waist area with a matching belt. Overall, the more motherly side of the crew had gotten busy over the last week supplying each one of their guests with all kinds of knitted, crocheted and sewn goods to ward off the significantly understanded onboard temperature of the human ship during their stay. Of course, Moore's giant, almost rug-like robe had been one of the more exciting challenges for them, taking up a lot of work time and material due to its sheer size alone. That, however, did not deter them from deciding that its plain, solid coloured design was too boring, and they had immediately gotten back to work on a new one, this time with an intricate design and a pattern that would no doubt match whatever look they had planned for the giant next. But for now, the one she had was more than enough to keep the old lady warm, and the Raphaelite warmly greeted Nier as she entered the room with a cart full of food. "Room service," Nier jokingly announced herself, pushing the cart in.
"Hello, Nier,"
Moore said politely, leaning a large head down to greet Nier more closely.
"I am sorry that you still have to bring these to me, but we are still not allowed to leave this part of the ship."
Nier waved off her concerns with one hand while stepping around the cart to pass the food off to the giant. "It's no bother, really," she assured happily, lifting the large pot of cooked greens with both hands and holding it up high so Moore could take it off her. "It takes my mind off of things. Besides, it's not like I have anything else to do at the moment. My work has been suspended, after all." Moore looked at her in an unfitting mixture of relief and concern as she took the pot out of her hands and immediately put it down on the mattress of her giant bed.
"Right, I am sorry," she said, averting her gaze. "It just does not suit me well to being so non-self-reliant."
Nier smiled and leaned against the wall. "Well, don't let me remind you that you're technically a prisoner here," she commented impishly. Moore chuckled softly.
"No need to remind me, I am well aware,"
she commented, keeping her amused undertone and shaking out her fur, the braids rattling against each other in places.
"But that does not mean I have to be content with just sitting around all day."
Having said that, she suddenly perked up, continuing with a bit more vigour.
"Speaking of which, would you like to come by later and talk about your work again? I know we already discussed a lot, but I really think I would do well in keeping my mind, as you say, on the up and up, and talking to a fellow researcher helps with that."
Nier snorted. "Well, you almost used that right this time," she commented with a brief laugh, before taking on a more serious and welcoming tone again. "Sure thing, Moore, I'll drop by later, but for now I guess I should get going. Wouldn't want to keep everyone waiting for their food for too long." Moore nodded.
"We sure would not,"
she agreed, and basically waved Nier out of the room with one of her claws.
"I will see you later."
"See ya. Enjoy your meal," Nier replied, and began to pull the cart out of the room to make her way to the next one. She closed the door behind her and walked through the halls at a brisk pace. The next closest cell was that of another giant, and Nier took a deep breath before approaching this one. Differently from Moore and the others, she hadn't met Conglorch before they had arrived on the Salem, and only got to know the Prajschet a good while after everyone else had already settled in on board, and only after he had been confident that he could hand off control over his ship to the human soldiers, without them crashing it immediately. Loudly, she knocked at the door of his cell.
"Enter!"
the loud, low voice of the Lizardor replied. When Nier opened the door, 4 intense orange eyes were already staring in her direction from the corner of the room Conglorch had settled down in.
"Greetings, dancer,"
the Prajschet greeted, and once he had sufficiently determined who it was disturbing his rest there, 3 of his 4 eyes turned away again, lazily scanning through the room, while only a single one remained focused on Nier. The plated titan had half laid down on a mattress he had personally carried into the corner of the room. His hind legs were flat at his sides, and his front molars were crossed in front of his body. His back was covered with multiple layers of thick blankets, trapping his mesothermic body heat, and allowing him to regulate his temperature more easily by adjusting how much of himself he covered.
"I'm guessing that you are still not going to take me up on my challenge, correct?"
the Lizardor asked, almost mockingly, and slightly tilted his head to the side so the lone eye could focus on her more easily. Meanwhile, Nier made herself busy with carrying the second and last large pot away from the cart and over towards him. "I already told you, I don't need to try to know how that will end," she explained, slightly exasperated that the topic was coming up every time she entered this room. "There are plenty of soldiers on board, pick a fight with them instead." Indeed, the Prajschet had been a source of excitement for the more adventurous sorts on board. The Lizardors had a reputation, after all, especially among the human military, and taking one down in a fight, especially a large blue one like this, was sure to bring some bragging rights amongst your peers. Although, so far, the record was looking quite good for the giant, as many of his challengers didn't seem to grasp the scope of their undertaking when they approached him. It was not unheard of for a confrontation between humans and Astrocytes to end either way, so their chances weren't that bad. But in general, the human contender needed to be a lot more careful about the whole thing if they didn't want the whole thing to come to an early end. There was a certain art to battling with a Lizardor, and neither many of the soldiers on board had not quite mastered.
You should push yourself more. Stagnation is a persistent mole that rots people and nature, Kongloj commented,
while the second one of his eyes now snapped around, eagerly focusing on the meat Nier was bringing him. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't really right either. I've done plenty of pushing in my life, Nier replied, pushing the pot down in front of the plated titan, while he leaned his large head down to take in the meat smell with both his large nostrils and his tongue, then briefly reached out of his gigantic maw. For now, I'm fine with knowing my limits. I've set them for myself after all, so I see no need to push them again, at least for a while. Kongloj reached out and almost gently grabbed one of the large slabs of meat that had been pressed into the pot, lifting it up and letting it slowly glide into his mouth and down his throat.
Suit yourself,
he said, humming through large, dagger-like teeth. At least he seemingly enjoyed his food.
But after the fight with your brother, it itches me to test myself against you as well.
Nier smirked and narrowed her eyes at the giant. You know, from what everyone has told me, I heard James was drunk when he fought you, she brought up in an almost mocking tone, feeling she was justified in egging Kongloj on just a little bit, after he wouldn't let up in his pursuit of battle, and that he only did it so he could protect you from Shida. To her slight disappointment, the Astrocyte didn't seem to be at all coy about the less than favourable circumstances of his and James's battle, and he replied quite straightforward.
That's what he told me as well. I was careless when I measured myself against him. He was my first dancer after all. I've gotten better at dealing with your kind since our battle, and it would not happen to me again. But he has earned my respect nonetheless.
He then paused for a moment and looked through the room thoughtfully.
Now that you mention it,
he mused aloud, and shortly waved the slab of meat around as he spoke.
The Meat has also never accepted my challenge after that day. I need to take that up with her again sometime soon.
Nier rolled her eyes and took some quick steps away from Kongloj. And that's my cue to leave, Shida exclaimed, definitely not wanting to accidentally encourage him to get on the feline's nerves as well. Enjoy your meal. I'll come to pick up the dirty stuff later. Kongloj acknowledged her input with a loud grunt, as she pushed the now significantly lighter cart out of yet another cell and closed the door behind her. 2 down, 2 more to go. However, on her way to the next door, she noticed that, as happens so often, somebody had already arrived there before her.
It's been acting up ever since, but hey, I've grown attached to the thing, so as long as it still works, I'll stick with it.
A deep, male voice loudly laughed out of the open door of Curie's cell. Nier smiled to herself as she neared the source of the voice. Just as the other members of the group, Curie had of course also attracted a certain crowd, in a way even more so than everyone else. Every person on board with any form of cybernetic enhancement basically had to have visited their room at least once by now. And indeed, when she peeked around the corner, Nier could see a large, rough-looking man with dark hair and a beard sit in the cyborg's room, flanked by 2 more younger soldiers, a man and a woman. The prosthetic leg was a model without artificial skin, so the metal and mechanics were easy to spot and discern, while the other 2 didn't have any visible enhancements, which likely only meant that theirs were better disguised than that of the man currently showing off while loudly laughing. I hope I'm not disturbing, Nier cut in, standing in the door's frame and softly knocking against it. Without waiting for an answer, she took the bottle containing Curie's meal off the cart, leaving it standing in the hall while she walked over towards the excited cyborg, who was busy inspecting the presented leg of the man. If there were already people here, she probably wouldn't stay long.
Well, if it isn't our passenger! How's things, lassie?
The man with the prosthetic loudly greeted her, while his colleagues stuck to the more reserved forms of hello. I'm fine, just bringing Curie their food, Nier replied softly, waving the bottle with the clear liquid around as if to demonstrate. She then slightly bent down and waved, trying to also get Curie's attention, as the cyborg was still very engrossed in the sight of the metal limb. It took a moment, but finally their red eyes seemed to shift their focus and find her face. Hello, is it time to eat already? They asked, sounding almost a bit surprised. Oh well, Nier could relate to getting lost in one's work, so she really couldn't judge them for it. Yep, don't worry, you can get right back to it. I'll just drop this off here, she replied, and handed them the bottle, which they happily accepted with both of their small hands, brushing the long, hanging ends of the scarf they were wearing out of the way in the process. Differently from everyone else, Curie had no problem with the ship's temperature, and therefore did not specifically need any sort of clothing. However, everyone doing the sewing and knitting had refused to not give them anything, so in the spirit of the quickly arriving autumn, they had gotten a variety of handmade scarves and beanies in all kinds of colours and patterns. Truth be told, there were probably a lot more than the cyborg knew what to do with. However, they certainly never complained, wearing a new, rarely matching set of hat and scarf every day. Today, their choice had fallen onto a brick red scarf with a cyan beanie with white dots and a fluffy bobble at the top, both of which clashed horribly with each other. "That doesn't really look like food to me," the younger soldier, not currently exposing his leg to everyone in the room, commented, leaning slightly to the side to get a better look at the bottle. His female company softly hit his shoulder with the back of her hand, giving him a disapproving look. "It is all the nutrients my remaining cells need," Curie happily informed, not at all insulted by his remark. "It is more than sufficient to sustain me as food." "So it's nutrient soup?" the other man asked, clearly sounding like he didn't fancy the idea of living specifically off of nutrients alone, even though it was just eating without any additives. "Where'd you even get that? Can't you just cook it up in the kitchen?" "It's the same stuff we feed the cells that grow our meat," Nier clarified for him with a shrug and crossed her arms. "It's basically the food for our food. Curious, just skipping a step." The men acknowledged the information with brief grunts while watching Curie empty the bottle through a short straw-like hose that emerged from somewhere underneath their head. Nier, who had seen that quite often already, wasn't quite as focused on the cyborg eating, and instead more closely inspected the group of soldiers, especially the two younger ones standing back a bit. She was trying to see if she could figure out whether those two also had prosthetics they wanted to talk to Curie about, and if yes, what part of their body it was. She had no luck with that, however. While trying to look closer at the man's arm, she noticed something else instead. "What happened to you?" she asked him, gesturing towards the seemingly fresh bandages on his arm that slightly peeked from under his sleeve. The man perked up in surprise and quickly pulled down his sleeve a bit further to cover the supposed injury, while his female colleague lifted a single finger to her mouth and shushed Nier. "Not so loud," she loudly whispered, and waved her free hand in a downward motion to emphasize her statement. She then mischievously looked left and right before continuing behind a lifted hand. "He was a bit too touchy with the cat. Don't want her getting in trouble for that now, so we're keeping it on the down low." "I already told you it's not like that," the man protested whiningly. However, his company just laughed him off. Nier frowned slightly. This wasn't the first time she had heard a story similar to this one while talking to someone with some seemingly fresh cuts on their arm. And while she could certainly sympathise with a girl needing her personal space, especially during hard times like this, things still couldn't go on like this. Even if Shida wasn't a prisoner, and just lucky that everyone scratched so far was taking it in good sport, Nier still couldn't condone Shida lashing out at anybody who got on her nerves. That behaviour just wasn't acceptable, no matter the situation. "I'll have to talk to her about that," she mused, not quite noticing that she was speaking out loud by now. "Sure, just make sure to stay at arm's length," the young man replied jestingly, and Nier wasn't quite sure if he knew that she really didn't need to worry about that. She wasn't going to comment further, though. And it was a fitting end, since Curie had at that moment finished their meal, and immediately began talking to the two's older colleague again. "So, you said that your leg has been acting up ever since an accident during your training?" They asked for clarification on the man's previous statement, pushing themselves up to their full height. "Could you elaborate on that accident for me? And in what way exactly your leg is malfunctioning? Also, you said you would stick with it. Does that mean you don't want it fixed or replaced? If so, is that really only because you have grown attached to it, or are there other reasons as well?" As Curie seemed to be quite content and in no need of any further company for the moment, Nier took that as her signal to leave and politely waved goodbye to the two younger soldiers, while the older one tried his best to remember every question Curie had asked to reply to them properly. "Have fun. I'll see you later, Curie," she loudly said while leaving the room. "Goodbye, Nier," Curie happily replied, waving after her with one of their large backward legs. That left only one. Without bothering to knock this time, Nier flipped the last switch for today, and felt the slight breeze blow past her face as the door shot open. As the room was bathed in darkness, she also turned on the lights, to the immediate reaction of a loud groaning coming from the direction of a large pile of blankets on the large bed. Nier waited a moment for any further reaction. As none came, she chuckled and loudly announced, "I brought food." For a moment, there still was no reaction. Then, slowly, the massive sheets began to shift, rustling and moving for a few seconds, until finally a head popped out of its middle, still half covered with a blanket, with only one eye and one ear peeking out and scanning the room for Nier. Nier picked up the tray of food and the first sensibly sized meal of the day, and presented it with a smile. Shida now slowly freed herself from the remaining sheets still covering her, slowly digging out of the masses of fabric and crawling to the edge of her bed on all fours, while Nier closed the distance between them and sat down on the mattress. The feline eagerly took the tray out of her hand and plopped down next to her, removing the lid and inspecting the cuts of meat with big eyes. Then she glanced over at Nier. Nier just smiled and nodded at her, which caused Shida to immediately start to hungrily wolf down her meal in big bites and without chewing, behaving like someone would come and try and take it away from her at any moment now if she didn't eat it right away. Nier sat next to her and watched her eat, leaning slightly to the side so their shoulders touched as she did so. Since Shida was so similar to a human, her clothes were probably the ones that the mums and dads of the ship had the most fun with while creating them. The feline had been showered in sweater after sweater and leggings after leggings, along with a truckload of socks, each one stranger than the last. Since Shida had made it quite clear very early that her sensibilities when it came to clothing were quite different from those of humans, and she wouldn't exactly be thrilled to wear any of the sacks, as she affectionately called them, no matter how nicely they were made. The seamsters and seamstresses had taken that as a sign to go completely wild with the designs, since the recipient for once would not mind. Some of the pieces of clothing tried to imitate Shida's stripe pattern. Others thought it would be funny to give her leopard dots instead. Some used whatever yarn they could find to make a wild swirl of colours, and yet again others had made patterns of stars, starting small and slowly becoming larger layer by layer. They sure had their fun with it. Combining it with the beanies and scarves of Curie, you could probably outfit a small village just with the clothes that had been made on this ship within the last weeks. Even though she didn't love them, the clothes did do their job of keeping her warm, so right now, Shida was wearing two of the pieces that imitated her natural pattern, although the base colour of the sweater was a striking orange, while the leggings were a pale cyan, both with black stripes. Due to how ravenously she devoured her food, it didn't take long until Shida had cleaned her entire plate. She put the dish to the side and, with a sigh, sank down against Nier even more, putting her head down on her shoulder, tickling Nier's cheek with the tip of her ear. "All done?" Nier asked uselessly, also letting her head sink and resting her cheek on Shida's hair. Shida confirmed with a hum, her tail slightly swaying, filling the silence with a swooshing sound each time it grazed over the mattress. It didn't seem like she wanted to talk much, however Nier couldn't let things stand as they were. "I saw you had a run-in with some soldiers earlier," she said, carefully but in a strict tone. "Didn't seem to be pleasant. You want to talk about that?" Shida's tail froze in its movement, and Nier could feel her slightly tense up. "It was just a misunderstanding," Shida quietly grumbled, which Nier could barely hear despite the feline being right next to her ear. "Shida, you can't go around injuring people. So far they've been very understanding, but what if that stops? Do you want to be locked away for real?" Nier asked, trying her best to sound empathetic, even though she really needed to be strict here to get across that she was being serious. Shida tensed up even more, and for a moment, Nier could feel that the feline wanted to push back on the accusations and defend herself. However, it didn't come to that. Instead, Shida let her ears hang and quietly replied, "I know, I'm sorry, but so many people wanting to be around me is exhausting, and they're really bad at knowing when not to touch me. Being alone was easier when everyone was afraid and didn't want anything to do with me." Nier lifted her head and looked down at the feline curiously. "You never seem to have a problem with me being around," she commented, and put her arm around Shida's shoulders to pull her in closer. Shida snorted. "That's different," she said. "I like you. Besides, James would be really mad if I put so much as a scratch on you." Nier sniggered. "He probably would," she confirmed amusedly, before more seriously adding, "But please, do try to not put any more scratches on anybody, alright? I know to you it feels overbearing, but they're only trying to be nice." Shida nuzzled her head against Nier for a moment. Then she lifted her hand and softly stroked across the painstakingly hand-knitted sweater she was wearing. "I know," she said softly, feeling the fabric in between two of her fingers. "Going to have to get used to that, I guess." "You'll get there just fine," Nier laughed, and put her hand on the back of Shida's head, ruffling through her hair. Shida pressed her head against her hand, and she even made the slightest hint of a purring noise as she did so. Then she sat up, pushing herself away from Nier and resting with her elbows on her knees while leaning forward. "Are there any news?" she asked in a tone that sounded almost melancholic. Nier was a bit surprised. Shida didn't usually ask for any updates, either because she knew that Nier would volunteer any information that had come forth in the meantime, or because she didn't want to let the topic occupy her mind for any longer than necessary. Maybe a mix of both. "Not much," Nier replied after a long exhale, and now also leaned forward to be on Shida's level again. "They've identified the body and it's not James, but since it was in cryostorage, we have no idea how long the guy is actually dead and who killed him. Meanwhile, any trail James has left behind is coming up short. It's like the void itself opened up to swallow him whole. Whatever they did with him, they've been thorough, but some other things still don't really add up, so the investigation is ongoing." "And do they think he's still alive?" Shida asked, and the bluntness of it gave Nier a slight shock. Not that the question was unreasonable. By now it had been more than a month since they had gotten any signs of life of her brother. "To be honest, they have no idea," Nier replied, and reached her hand out to massage her eyes for a moment. There's no evidence pointing to either possibility. For now he's presumed missing in action, and they'll work off of that. Shida hummed in acknowledgement, a 1,000-yard stare on her face. Nier took a deep breath and continued. But if you want to know what I'm thinking, James is tougher than weeds. As long as I've not seen any proof that he's gone, God himself could come down from the heavens and tell me he's dead and I'll answer, picture it didn't happen. If you run around treating him like he's dead, he's going to be pissed if he comes back. It would almost feel like we hoped he had died out there, wouldn't it? Shida released a sharp breath through her nose. You're probably right, she said, snickering. She then pushed herself up and off the bed, stretching for a moment by locking her hands and pushing them far above her head. Turning her head to look over her shoulder, she looked at Nier and asked, Hey, what do you say? Would you like to go and exercise a bit together? I think I'm getting rusty from just lounging around all day. Nier immediately had an excusatory look on her face, and she awkwardly scratched the back of her head as she replied, I'd love to, but I can't already promise more that I would meet up with her to talk about work later. Sorry. She saw a bit of disappointment creep in on Shida's face, but quickly added, But you could join us if you want to. I bet more wouldn't mind. Shida gave her an appreciative look with a soft smile, but almost immediately declined. You know I can't do science talk. I'll just bring the mood down by needing to have everything explained to me. Nier wanted to disagree, but Shida, most likely knowing what she was going to say, waved it off before she'd even opened her mouth. It's fine, really. I'll just go by myself. I'm sure there'll be plenty of humans wanting to join if I go looking, she said reassuringly. You just go have fun. Also, if you still have time, you can always join me later. Or some other time. It's not like we're going anywhere anytime soon. Nier pursed her lips. Well, if you say so, she replied, now also getting up and picking up the dirty dishes still left on the bed to put them back in her cart. You have fun as well. Shida didn't directly reply. She just lifted her right hand high above her head, snapped her fingers a single time, and pointed a finger back at Nier, before sauntering out of her own cell, leaving Nier to look after her, and wonder what exactly had just happened. The humming of the running treadmill under her feet loudly filled the room. Come on, push it! An encouraging yet annoying voice loudly rang out from her side, excitedly cheering her on as she neared the last stretch of the program run. Her legs burned from previous underuse, and she breathed heavily, trying to hold on to her dwindling stamina, as her feet tore across the artificially moving floor. Some awe-filled noises could be heard from a group of humans watching her, who were seemingly just manifested within the improvised training area that had been set up for the prisoners, as soon as Shida had decided she wanted to use it. Push it! The encouraging voice to her right yelled again, and some more humans chimed in. Geez, how is she doing that? One human asked another. She's not human, literally, the address replied excitedly. Shida could feel her constitution waning already, as the atrophy of the last few days was still very present in her muscles. Compared to humans, she had pitiful stamina even at her best of times, and right now she was nowhere near her peak. However, even though they were annoying her, she listened to the shouts, and she pushed it. In unison, the primates began a loud countdown as soon as the timer for the remaining time had hit 10 Earth seconds left. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. They excitedly yelled out, one louder than the other. And with the end in sight, Shida could feel her knees yell out in protest. But she wouldn't falter in the last few seconds. She refused, biting her teeth together, sweat dripping down her face. With even more vigour, the humans continued the last few seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. With a loud beep, the machine announced that its pre-programmed run was now over, and Shida immediately jumped off its rubbery surface, placing her feet next to the still-moving belt while crashing forward and supporting herself with both hands on the device's surface, feeling her legs trying to buckle under her, which she probably would have done if her arms weren't holding most of her weight now. The human's cheering was drowned out by her heartbeat pounding loudly in her ear, and the rasp of her own uncontrolled breathing. Fucking hell, you reached some 60 kilometers per hour there. I didn't even know the treadmills go up that high. I know we're in low grap, but still, damn. One of the human soldiers that had cheered her on loudly commented, walking up from the side and lifting his hand. Clearly wanted to pat her on the back. Had one of his colleagues not stopped him by grabbing his arms mid-movement. At least they were making an effort. You should see what actual sprinters can do. She had pressed out between laboured breaths, trying to blink away the dark spots forming around her vision. Maybe pushing it right at her first training after being inactive for so long had not been the best idea. It felt good, though, despite the nausea. Once she had reconstituted enough that she could lift her head again, one of the humans handed her a towel, and she used it to wipe away some of the sweat her body had drenched her in. Thank you, she said, also trying to make an effort, and investigated the excited-looking people around. Do you need some water? Another human asked, and Shida thankfully accepted that as well. She eagerly drank with big gulps, while some of the humans chittered amongst each other in their own language, that she still didn't understand in the slightest, despite some of Nier's efforts to teach her the basics. Maybe it was also a completely different language. Humans seem to switch in between a lot of them quite often. Well, people back on Earth would have to watch out as soon as... Her motivational cheerio finally started, though he wouldn't get to say what exactly they would have to watch out for, because at exactly that moment another group, made up of humans, a cyborg, a Raphaelite, and a Tenaciocyte, they suddenly burst through the door, led by a very irate-looking Nier. "Turn the TV on! Channel 478237, now!" she loudly ordered, before any of the confused-looking humans within the room could get out even a single question as to what was going on. And as it seemed that the young woman was very serious about her request, one of the humans immediately obliged. Shida also really wanted to ask what was going on, but a look on everyone's face told her to hold on and wait with that. Instead, she lifted her exhausted head and stared up at the screen that hung in the now crammed room's corner and had just been turned on. Everyone was standing shoulder to shoulder as they stared up at the screen to see what the hell was so important. Slowly, the mumbling and whispering among each other died down, while simultaneously, the volume of the device was turned up so everyone could also hear what was being said. Shida's eyes widened as the camera perspective changed, zooming in closely on a familiar face. He looked pale, even more than usual, and haggard. The dark bags under his eyes had only grown in size, along with his now long hair and beard, giving him an untended look, and his dark eyes looked forward in a dead stare. One hand was up at his face, scratching at his beard, as he did so often. There were many more, a lot more concerning things about his appearance that Shida would only notice later, as right now she was too caught up on his face as he was speaking into the camera. Whatever speech he had been holding, it seemed that it was already nearing its end, as the news had taken too long to reach them down here. Of this attack cannot be ignored, and not only as an ambassador of my people, but also as a victim of such a ruthless display of aggression, I have decided that, to prevent any further senseless violence and suffering, I, James Aldwin, will candidate for the free seat in the Galactic Council during this upcoming election. I know I am unknown to many of you, and this may seem audacious of me to think I can win you over in such a short time, but I have many people you all know and trust at my side supporting my cause, so I hope you will lend me your ear in the days and weeks to come. I am convinced that I can help build a better tomorrow. Success to you, prosperity for all, unity in the community.